Welcome to Not Silent Podcast. Today we are talking about a very sensitive topic, the abuse that affects over 230 million girls and women across the world. Female genital mutilation, or known as FGM. My guest today is Fatou Baldeh from the Gambia. She is herself a survivor of FGM. She has been cut when she was 8 years old. She is a human rights activist, a founder of the Women in Liberation and Leadership. In 2024, she stopped Gambian Parliament from repealing the ban on FGM. Fatou has been awarded international for her courage. She has been awarded by the Time magazine as a Woman of 2025. Just recently, she was awarded by the Clooney Foundation for Justice, and she was Woman of Courage awardee from the U.S. State Department in 2024, and I'm very honored to have her today as my guest. Fatou, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Before we go any further, many people that are listening to us and watching, they don't know about what FGM is. Can you explain to the listeners and viewers more about what FGM is?
Thank you. Thank you again. So, FGM, which means female genital mutilation, is a practice that involves the cutting of girls' genitals. There are different forms according to the World Health Organization's classifications. They have classified female genital mutilations into 4 types, type 1 to type 4. Procedure involves ranges from type 1, which involve the removal of the clitoris, to more extreme forms that involve the removal of the female genitalia, the labias, the stitching. There's a lot of different types of FGM that happens, and globally 230 million girls are living as survivors of FGM. And by the end of 2024 alone, UNICEF has estimated that 4 million girls would be caught. So FGM is a very widespread practice that affects a lot of women and girls across the world.
You are not only an activist, you are a survivor. Can you share what happened to you when you were 8 years old?
Yes, when I was a child growing up, where I grew up, every girl knew that you go through a procedure, although this procedure wasn't really spoken about. So when I was between the age of 7 and 8, it was time for me to go through this process. I was not really told what was going to happen. I remember I was, dressed up and got new clothes and everything, and I was told we were going to visit my uncle's house, and myself and close family members, including girls within my age bracket, we were all taken to my oldest uncle's house. In the beginning, there was a lot of celebration, a lot of my aunties, a lot of my family members. It was nice to see everyone. And then we were taken into at the back of the house, and we were put in a queue. And I remember that when we were queuing, we were all blindfolded with a cloth and our eyes were tied, so we couldn't see what was happening. But I think from that moment, myself, but also speaking to other survivors, that's when you know that this is not something that is very exciting. Why are they blindfolding me? And during that time, we in the queue, one after the other girl kept going in, and I could hear girls screaming every time someone went in. Of course, I didn't know what was happening. And when it was my turn, I came in and I was held by female family members. Usually it's your aunties or people close to you, either your mother or your father's side of the family. And when we went inside this, it's in a bathroom, really. And the next thing I knew, I was pinned down on the floor, and my clothes were taken out and my genitals were cut. And usually that's the procedure in the Gambian context. Most times that's how girls are cut. And of course, too, during that whole process, girls are not giving any medication to numb the pain, not any medication to prevent infections or bleeding or anything. I remember after we were cut, the only form of medication we were given was salt and warm water, and every morning, and herbs. You had to sit in that water. It was seen to be like something that would prevent infections and stuff. And for me, if I think back, my trauma comes more, in fact, from having to
Heal.
do that every morning and evening, that pain, like on an open wound, and having to sit on salt and water, warm water. That pain I can still kind of feel in my head.
Usually does this procedure?
Usually, the cutting is done by an elderly woman who is assigned this responsibility in the community, and it's not someone with any understanding of the woman's body, has no medical training or anything, and it's usually they use equipment such as razor blades or knives or scissors to cut girls.
So probably most of the time there is a lot of infection.
Yes. So, yes, infections are something that is very common when girls are cut. That's one thing, but also usually the same equipment, if it's a razor blade, is the same one that is used to cut several girls at the same time, which makes it also even more dangerous, because if there is anyone who is cut in that group who has any bloodborne disease like HIV or hepatitis, it's very easy to spread that among the girls.
Should we go to the core of this process? Why this is happening? Is it religion? Is it culture? Who is enforcing FGM?
Yes. So in many places where FGM is practiced, there is a misconception that it is a religious requirement. But of course, we know that FGM has no religious basis. So it is more of a cultural practice. It's a cultural, traditional practice that is passed from one generation to another. But because of the misconception, in many countries where FGM is prevalent, is where women have very low, again, I speak on Gambian context, where even though we have a majority Muslim population, our understanding of Islam, especially for a lot of women, we are only taught how to remember the surahs, how to pray, but not really understand what Islam says about women, what rights Islam gives to women, and all that. We are really not taught that. And also because the religion is most cases interpreted to us by men, it is usually interpreted in a way that favors men and force power by men, but that's not really the reality. And whilst FGM in the Gambia is completely spearheaded by women, it's usually the grandmothers, the mothers, the aunties who organize, who do the cutting, who do the celebration. But ultimately, it is done to control women's sexuality. And it's also done to please men, because there is a belief that if women are cut, then they would be faithful partners, they will not be promiscuous, and ultimately just to control women and silence women. But one of the things I say for me, especially now that I understand the field of gender-based violence more, I say that FGM is one of the biggest manifestation of gender inequality. FGM teaches girls at a very tender age that you as a young woman, as a girl, your body does not belong to you, and other people have a right to violate your body. And the fact that when FGM happens, it happens from people close to you, your family, intimate people close to you, you are also being told it's okay to accept violence from people that are intimate, close to you. So you'll see in the future, even when girls from that community experience domestic violence, for example, you were caught at the age of 7 and 8 on the floor by people who are close to you. So when you experience violence in the future, you kind of think it's okay, these are people close to me, because that narrative was instilled in you as a young girl. So you grow up believing in that. So it has a lot of links to gender-based violence.
When I've been reading and hearing about your story, you've shared that when they cut you, they ask you not to talk about it.
Absolutely.
If you talk about that same person will come and harm you.
Absolutely.
So basically, this is from that moment, they silence you and it becomes the norm.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, very true. And that's a very important point. And every girl that I have spoken to that has gone through this is one of the first things they are told. Do not speak about what happened to you. Be silent about it. And rightfully, as you said, that's also where women are told to be silent. Yeah, that's where women are taught you cannot speak. And for so many women like me that refuse to be silent on this issue, we say we are not going to be silent on something that is harming women and girls and affecting our health both physically and mentally.
So, again, to explain to our viewers, this cutting has been done for women not to have sexual feelings.
Yes.
This way, but and the later on and the during the process when you get the periods, you have a lot of problems. Can you share with our audience what these women go through after being cut?
Yes. So FGM has both short-term and long-term complications. So as I said, the way that the cutting happens without any medication and stuff, a lot of girls can develop infections. A lot of girls can bleed severely. Like for example, in the Gambia, a couple of months ago, we lost two babies. One was just 1 month old and the other was just 3 weeks old, who both were cut and they bled to death generally. So that can happen. But also in the long term, women have a lot of complications, particularly around menstruation, because in some cases of FGM, women are sealed, they're completely sealed together and left with a very tiny hole, and that hole is what they would use for passing urine and also for menstruation. Then what happens is that a lot of the blood does not come out, and even where it comes out very slowly. It doesn't flow out properly. For some women, that blood can even stay in and form a cyst inside, and women in that situation are very vulnerable to recurrent infections. But also FGM is linked to a lot of health problems during pregnancy and childbirth. There is a lot of evidence linking women who have had FGM has higher risk of C-sections and complications during pregnancy, such as also during childbirth, such as needing operations or stitching or opening up so that it can allow the passing of the baby. So there are a lot of different range of complications that are associated with the practice.
Considering that this is society norm, when you decided to speak up,
Mm-hmm.
you probably received a lot of reaction and threats.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the main challenges you faced the moment you speak up about this issue?
I think for me, speaking about FGM was a journey. Growing up, FGM, like you said, it's the norm. It was something that was acceptable, and nobody ever gave me another angle that this is wrong or this may affect women in any way. I never had that conversation. And of course, when I went through that process of realizing how FGM affect women and girls through my educational journey, I started speaking up, but I started through close friends and my sisters and people that were close to me, just to talk about what do you think of FGM and stuff. So that's how I started. But of course, as I became more open about how I feel about the practice and advocating against the continuation of the practice. Of course, a lot of the attacks are usually that I'm fighting my religion, I'm not respecting my culture. So there's a lot of name calling, a lot of attacks on my identity as an African woman, where people are saying you are an African woman and you are attacking your African culture and your tradition, and that can be hurtful, because I love being African. That's my identity. I love being an African woman, and I love a lot of my culture. There's so many aspects of my culture that is beautiful that I embrace. But what I am saying, any culture that harms women and girls, I don't want to embrace that culture. I don't want to see that culture continuing.
Fatou, you mentioned a very important detail when you said there are also women who are a part of organizing this procedure. So, which means it's not just about men enforcing, there are also women enforcing.
Yes, sadly, yes, the whole practice is driven by women, but for the benefit of men. And what you'll find in most of our context is women are not giving a lot of responsibility, a lot of rights, a lot of decision to make decision. And this is one area that women are given complete control. This is your your business,
Field.
you control it. And in that, women really hold on to this tradition. And also, in addition to that, in our communities, when girls are not caught, because it's a norm, it's a social acceptable norm, when girls are not caught, they're the ones that are seen as being outside the norm. They're the ones that are stigmatized. They're the ones that men would say, I will not marry. And if you come from a society where mothers believe that the best thing for my daughter is finding a good husband. That's how, for many mothers, that's the ultimate aim. I can have my degree, I can be a doctor, but if I don't bring a husband, I have not fulfilled the expectations of my society. So for a lot of women, that's what they see for their daughters. And marriage is very much linked to FGM, where in some communities, if a girl is not caught, no man will marry them. So this is one of the driving factors from women, because I get some women saying to me, but why would women continue doing this when they know that they've been through it and they know the harm? And one of the reasons is that because if you do not cut your child, then you are seen as the bad mother and your daughter is the one that is stigmatized. So when mothers do it, it's a society that is pressuring them to continue this practice. That is why it is important for society to be confronted, for us to have these conversations.
From the highest authority, who are those that are enforcing FGM?
Yes, interestingly, and I think that's the complications of FGM. In Gambia, the biggest drivers are our grandmothers, because it is a rite of passage. So for a lot of grandmothers, oh, it's my turn now. My granddaughter is at this stage where I have to pass this on. So older women are big drivers of FGM. Aunts, like the father's sister from the patriarchal side, the father's sister usually is very, very involved in the cutting, and the grandmother. So they are the biggest drivers. However, in the Gambia now, outside the family structure, if you look at the system, the biggest drivers who are saying this practice should continue are religious leaders. Again, linking it to religion, that this is our religion.
They are using the religion to enforce the FGM.
Yes. So in the Gambian context, our strongest driver is that. And because for decades and decades, society was told this is an obligation, a religious obligation, people believe this should happen. And I think for us in Gambia, this is one of the challenges that we are having, that FGM is very much linked to religion. And because of that, it's been affecting our advocacy and also, of course, around the law, as you know.
So when you started the campaign, of course, you have to raise awareness. This is not just because men are also suffering because their daughters, their wives, during the sexual intercourse, they have a lot of pain, and you listed all other problems that they have. Do you see the men are aware, or they are interested to know more about, or do you have a support from the men in your campaign?
Yes, actually, engaging men and boys in ending FGM is really, really crucial. So I'll give you an example within my family. My niece, who is the first in my extended family not to be caught, when I started speaking up and saying into my family she shouldn't be caught, it took my brother to come up and support my stance for her not to be caught. So I have seen in my family that even with my voice, it was still a struggle. But as soon as my brother came in and said, I agree with Fatou and that my daughter shouldn't be caught, that was all it took. Yeah. So I recognize the role that men can play in ending FGM. I think for a long time, the narrative and the advocacy against FGM left men outside, because FGM was always seen as a women's issue. And I think that also affected our campaign in ending the practice. But now, in almost all countries in Africa that are doing work on FGM, are recognizing the significant role. So for example, our organizations, we talk with men and boys our advocacy and our awareness raising involve talking to men and boys, talking to religious leaders who in my context are usually just men, but also talking to community leaders. So what you see in our structures, the hierarchy is all led by men. So we cannot have an effective change if we do not bring them on board. But also because of the silence and the taboo around FGM, most Gambian men until the past few years didn't really get engaged and didn't talk about FGM. So, when you don't speak about something, when you don't acknowledge the harm, then you don't realize the severity. So I think that space is definitely opening up, and conversations and awareness raising is reaching men there. And I think that's what is really important, that FGM is not just seen as a women's issue or just a culture and tradition. FGM should be seen in the broader lens of this is a form of violence against girls. Usually when girls are caught, they are babies, they are young girls who cannot consent to having their genitalia cut, and it has complications. So when we look at FGM as a form of gender-based violence, as a form of violence against children, and as an issue of sexual and reproductive health, then we can move forward rather than just looking at it as a cultural traditional practice.
So it's very important that especially younger men get engaged.
Yes.
But do you have, when we're talking about these religious leaders that are using religion to oppose it, to oppose your campaign, do they also work on their own campaign against what you are doing? And do they also work with the younger generation, especially men? Because this is like kind of the fight between two
Yeah,
sides.
absolutely. So in fact, what we are seeing now, the pro-FGM, which is not exclusively just religious leaders. There are some men in power, but also some women who join this movement as pro-FGM that want to see FGM continue. And of course, they are using the same strategy. Like you and I are having these conversations, they are also setting up conversations as to why FGM should continue. In Gambia, we are seeing where in our mosque, during Friday prayers, they're using that platform to advocate for the continuation of FGM. We are seeing social media posts. So every strategy that we've been using to advocate against FGM, the pro-FGM is equally using those strategies to misinform people as to why this practice need to continue. So that really affects us too, and really stops us from moving forward.
Do you see the raise awareness, especially after you start talking and opposing FGM? Do you have the number of younger women and men joining you in your campaign?
Oh, absolutely. I have seen a shift in the Gambian society. One, people are more open now and talking about the issue. I am a strong believer that if we do not have a conversation, I believe in dialogue, whether people accept that FGM should continue or not, we should start having these dialogues, because only that way can we confront the drivers and understand why people are continuing to do FGM. So I have seen the whole Gambian society now, everybody is speaking about FGM, whether they agree with it or not. But importantly, I'm seeing the young generation, young women and young girls coming and saying, we don't want this to continue. We don't want to cut our daughters. And I guess the hopeful thing to know is that FGM can be ended in a generation. If I don't cut my daughter, she's not going to cut her daughter. So it's about ending. And this is why for us, at our organization at WILA, we invest a lot in targeting adolescent girls and boys to talk to them about FGM, so that we will normalize them understanding the harm that FGM and other forms of gender-based violence can create in our society, not only affecting women, but also affecting the development and the advancement of our country.
Fatou, I remember in one of your interviews you've mentioned there was a young couple that decided not to cut their daughter, but the mother from the father's side. Can you share this? Because
Yes.
you have a young couple that are going to say no, but you have someone else from your family doing that.
Exactly. So that's the challenge with FGM, because there are different people who are involved in this decision. I have met, in fact, yes, right. I've met so many couple who would say to me, even men, and they would say, I decided I'm not going to cut my daughter, and my mother came and took my daughters away and cut them. I've met so many people like that. So again, it goes back to saying it's important to engage everyone. In fact, we've moved in Addison, we create safe spaces for young people to talk to them, but we also go into the community to engage everybody, including grandmothers, mothers, community leaders, so that we expand the conversation and get more people on board who would see the harm on FGM and support the movement. But that is absolutely right. Those are some of the challenges that we have in moving forward.
You had the law since 2015 that banned FGM, but then in 2024, the parliament wanted to repeal the ban, and you immediately reacted and you succeeded to prevent it. Share us a little bit your struggle into all this process and who helped you, because you also need people in the parliament to be on your side.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, our law on FGM was introduced in 2015, and in 2023 we had the first successful prosecution where 3 women were found guilty of performing FGM on several girls, and they were fined. And because of that, there was a backlash where particularly religious leaders came forward to say that the arrest of those women and the charges is against our culture and tradition. And they took a vow that they were going to do everything possible to ensure that the ban against FGM was repealed. And of course, consequently, the parliament picked this up, and the bill was tabled at parliament to discuss whether FGM should be illegal or again legalized. So a lot of our fight for that was very multi-stakeholder. Like, we worked with communities to try to get them to understand why it was so important to maintain the ban. We also work in the beginning, I would tell you 90% of our members of parliament were moving forward with repealing the ban, because there were different factors, even though some of them strongly believe that FGM is wrong and it shouldn't happen. But they would tell you that if I vote against the repeal, then my constituency will not re-elect me because this is what society wants. So it was more about, also for some MPs, about maintaining their positions, about staying in power. And FGM was now being used as a tool. So this is why one of our strongest strategy was to go target those members of parliament and go into their community to make sure that their communities speak to them to say, we are with you, we want you to maintain this ban. That was a strong strategy that worked for us, because it built confidence that the MPs, if they vote to maintain the ban, they still have their support from their communities. But also storytelling and survivor voices. One of the challenges we had when the bill was tabled, they wanted evidence. They said we need evidence to prove that FGM harms women. And they didn't believe, they told us straight on, we don't want any evidence outside of the country. And Gambia is a place where research is very limited. We don't have a lot of evidence. So what we did was mobilize survivor voices, people like myself and other women. We went into the parliament and testified as to how FGM has affected us, but also what we are seeing in the society. And also we were very strategic about that. We made sure that it wasn't just women like myself who are seen as activists, or the narrative that we are influenced by the West, that's why we are attacking our culture. We diversified the panel. We made sure we brought women from rural communities, women from different age groups. We also looked for allies among men, to come and support us at the parliament. We looked for medical professionals who were able to come forward and say, okay, I am a man. I may not know what it feels like to be a FGM survivor, but I've treated women who've had this and this and this complications. So it was a combination of different things, but also importantly, and what I really appreciated was the support globally. Yes, the movement was led by Gambians, but we have supporters globally who were using social media, who were writing articles. We had journalists from outside the Gambia who put this out in the platform, because as I always maintain, yes, this is an issue of culture and tradition, but Gambia is not an island. We are part of the international community. We have signed treaties under the UN that bans FGM. So that made this an international issue. And I'm really glad that we had support from the international community that were also amplifying our advocacy.
Yeah, you've mentioned because those men at the parliament, they have daughters. I have listened one of them who said that he has 4 daughters. I don't know if they have been caught, but he was on your side. So
Yeah. Yes, he was one of, I know exactly who you mean, and he was one of our strongest supporters. He's Honorable Jibimbalo, and he has daughters who unfortunately were already caught. And I think one of the things he said to me, he couldn't protect his girls, and he now has an opportunity to protect other girls. Same, he didn't want his girls to be caught, but his mother took the girls when he was not around and caught them. So for him, he saw this as an opportunity to speak up. And I can tell you, amount of abuse he received, which was also extended to his family members. It got to a point where he had to move his family outside of where they lived, because nobody would serve even when the wife went to the market, they wouldn't sell things to her. So it was that level of attacking towards him, because of him and his family, because of the stance he took.
you are also one of the main voices. Can you share some of the threats you received during your journey?
Yes, and I saw this across. We got to a point where so many of us started avoiding social media posting, because anytime you post, there were so many attacks. I was getting phone calls, people telling me they knew where my kids go to school, that they knew where I live, putting, or that I was a bad Muslim. And when people start thinking that what you do is against their religion, then it becomes more extreme, because this now wasn't just about culture. I was myself and other women who were in the forefront were now then being seen as going against our religion. And that is really, I think, one of the hardest thing is religious leaders in Gambia are very influential. They are the fabric that holds our society together. When a woman gets married, the marriage is done by the religious leaders. If I have a child, I'm naming my child, it's the religious leaders that come. If death happens, it's the religious leaders. Basically, they control a society. So if you are doing any work that is seen to be against those religious leaders, which is not what I am doing, but that's what the narrative is out there, it really puts you and your family in a vulnerable position.
It's historically religion used to fear people, to fear society, and that is very makes it harder for you to run this campaign because, as you said, if they have so much influence, which means it's harder for you to convince those people who are influenced by them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And my team have been to some communities where we are literally chased out and stoned. Men will come out with stones and say, if you do not leave, we're going to attack you. And my team will get in the car and leave that community. It got to that level. But luckily, things are changing. And I think, again, for me, this is why I believe that it is so important for us to maintain the law, because when the law is there, it also provides a platform for organizations and a framework and protection for organizations like us to operate in the community and to speak to people on this issue.
Any of the religious people, imams, that support you publicly.
Absolutely. And that's what we are working on more, to strengthen our ties with religious leaders, but also for them to understand that our fight is not against religion. What we are talking about, it's women and girls and our bodies and protection and safety. And we are getting somewhere at a point where we are getting more religious leaders that are coming on our side, even if they do not agree with us entirely. They're ready to listen. They are creating that platform where we can dialogue, and they're listening to us and we are listening to them and looking for solutions that are respectful. Because for me, it is really important to me that religious leaders do not see me as someone who is offending them. I want to bring more people on board. If we had more religious leaders coming out and strongly opposing FGM, I can tell you we would have gone a long way.
So you probably have to go beyond just talking about against FGM. You have to go into also talking about how they are using religion, because it's been used in different forms. And when you question religion or you question that God, it becomes more harder.
Yes, absolutely. For me, one of my arguments, particularly for religious people who use religion, especially Islam, to challenge FGM. For me, my argument is that really, if FGM was an Islamic obligation, that would have been very clear in the scriptures. The fact that we don't have anything that is strongly showing us that FGM is a religious obligation, or we don't have any records where it shows that any of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam daughters or wives were caught, or people who are the Sahabas or people who were close to him. We don't have any of that. Or the fact that we have a lot of Muslim countries, majority Muslim countries, who are not practicing FGM, both within Africa and also internationally, really shows that FGM is not an obligation in Islam. So for me, that alone is enough. But again, how we need to continue having that conversation. We need to bring those thoughts to communities so that they can question those perceptions.
And it's the easiest tool to control women, as we said in the beginning of this podcast. You fight at the parliament against the repeal of the bill. Why this is important, or also beyond your borders?
Thank you. So, I started speaking to other women who are working on FGM in other parts of Africa. In fact, in West Africa, like Sierra Leone and Liberia, who are already telling me that when they go to their communities, they were being told that, hang on, don't talk about FGM. Do you see what's happening in Gambia? In other countries that do not have a law, where activists are advocating to have a law banning FGM, their countries are telling them, no, we have to wait and see what's going on in Gambia, because Gambia had a law and they are fighting to maintain that ban. So we were all already being seen as a country that is going to set the precedent. Other countries are already watching. And ending FGM is part of the Sustainable Development Goal 5.3, which is anticipated to end in 2030. We know that we are far away from that, but if Gambia was to repeal the law on FGM, that would set us back. That will be a very treble regression in women's rights, not just FGM, but ultimately on GBV in general. For example, in Gambia, the same pro-FGM were already saying that if they repealed the ban on FGM, they were going to go against child marriage. They wanted the law against child marriage. What was going to be next? And what is happening in the Gambia is not an isolated issue. We've seen how women's rights, sexual and reproductive health issues are really being attacked across the globe. So this is not an isolated issue. It's under the broader fight to control women.
And it's also in Western countries as well.
Yes, exactly what I mean. It's what we're seeing in Gambia is a reflection of what is happening across the globe, where we are seeing women's bodies, women's rights are continuously being attacked.
But you've mentioned support of international authorities, but the hardest work is when you do this in your own country.
Absolutely.
It's there in the field. You have to go on the streets, families, door to door to speak up. You have received awards, as I mentioned. You've been the top woman in 2025 from the Times Magazine, the Clooney's Foundation for Justice, and the U.S. State Department Woman of Courage Award. What does this mean for you, the international support and being awarded for your courage?
Thank you. I think for me, the international awards, I strongly appreciate them. And also, they really bring the issue of FGM at the global level. It shows, for me, that's when an international body or a country recognizes my work, it's not about Fatou. It's you acknowledging that FGM is an issue. It's a global issue. It's a women's rights issue, especially when it comes to human rights organizations. So for me, that is very important. But as you said, the heart of this fight is in the countries where it is practiced. Seeing, and I received an award in the Gambia where it was from Gambian women who recognized me as the activist of the year. And for me, that was like one of the most powerful awards because it was my country recognizing my effort. It was women in my country saying, I really, really appreciated that because my people were recognizing my effort. And that also really reinforces the need for us to continue at the grassroots level for our communities to trust us. Although I say to people that I feel when I work with my communities, I'm not an activist. When I work with my communities, I am their sister, I am their daughter, I am from that community. I am talking about my realities, which in most cases are the same as theirs. Maybe as an activist, if I was talking to the government or internationally and stuff, that's when, okay, if you call me an activist, fair enough. But in my community, when I do my work, I am just a Gambian woman like any other one.
You are a survivor and you know the best what this means.
Exactly.
Fatou, thank you for trusting us to share your story, your courage, and you put your own life into risk and your kids' life and your family's life for this cause. Thank you so much for being a part of Not Silent Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate these platforms because ending FGM also requires everybody knowing about this issue. Recently, I keep meeting people and they would be like, oh, I heard about FGM like 30 years ago. I thought this was ended. And people are still shocked to find that in 2025, we are still talking about millions of girls being caught. So, this is why these kind of platforms are really important for us to spread the word. And I really appreciate you featuring me.
One more thing, you mentioned some of people heard, but unfortunately, some of them, they didn't know. And just recently, I was talking with my friends about the podcast, and I'm excited to talk to you. And one of my friends said, oh, I have seen the movie. I didn't know that this is happening. And there are so many that don't know that, as you said, over 230 million girls are suffering from this.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So this is why I am really grateful for this platform. And thank you.
Thank you, Fatou.